The greatest gift for your brother's wedding, my mother's voice sliced the air like polished glass, is if you disappear from our family forever. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The chandelier above trembled, scattering fractured light across the dining table, and all I could hear was the echo of her sentence clanging inside my chest. My father didn't blink. My brother smirked that self-satisfied curl of his mouth that had always meant he'd won again. Hi everyone, my name is Averly Caraway, and I've spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I'm 29 years old, the eldest daughter, the one who cleaned up after my brother's chaos, soothed my mother's tantrums, managed my father's taxes, and still somehow became the disappointment. That night, their words didn't break me, they hollowed me out. I remember gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white, because if I let go, I might have shattered something. The chandelier flickered again as if even the light itself recoiled from what had just been said. My mother's face was perfection, not a line out of place, lipstick immaculate. But there was triumph behind her eyes, a cruel little satisfaction. My father's silence was worse. Silence has always been his favorite weapon cleaner than shouting, more permanent than apology. My brother leaned back, that smug groom-to-be grin glowing under the golden light, and I realized this was a celebration for them, my exile wrapped up as etiquette. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw my wine in their faces, but instead I heard myself say, "Is that all?" My voice came out too calm, too steady for someone whose world had just collapsed. No one answered. They didn't need to, so I pushed my chair in neatly and left. No begging, no tears, no one followed. The door clicked shut behind me like a full stop at the end of a long, cruel paragraph. Outside, the night was cold, the kind that stings your skin and wakes up everything you've tried to numb. I breathed in the city air, exhaust winter, the faint sweetness of bakery bread, and somewhere under that, the scent of something burning inside me. Not grief, not yet. Something quieter, something sharper. Betrayal doesn't always shatter a woman. Sometimes it sculpts her. When I reached my apartment, a tiny box 3 floors up with peeling paint and the ghost of someone else's perfume lingering in the hallway, I didn't cry. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Somewhere between the streetlights fading and the first birds waking, I made a decision. If they wanted me gone, I'd give them what they asked for. But not before I rewrote the story of who truly disappears. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the blinds, spilling gold across the floor. It felt like prison bars the day before, but now they looked like an invitation. I made coffee slowly, the way I used to when I still believed mornings could mean peace. The steam rose in fragile ribbons, curling like ghosts of every memory I'd buried. Then I opened the drawer. Inside were papers, the joint ownership deed, the account forms, the codes my father had trusted me with years ago, because Averly, you're the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who never failed. Funny how responsibility becomes a weapon once you've been betrayed. I stared at those papers for a long time. My fingers trembled once, then steadied. I turned on my laptop, typed the passwords from memory, and watched the numbers unfold on the screen like old secrets laid bare. By noon, the joint family account, the same one funding the floral walls and champagne fountains for my brother's wedding, was frozen. $1.78 million locked. No more endless spending on a celebration that excluded me. The next folder held the deed to the family's secondary apartment, the one my parents insisted be in my name, because Averly's responsible. They had no idea that one day that signature would become my salvation. By evening, I'd called the real estate agent. "Yes," I said, keeping my tone light. "List it, discreetly." When I hung up, my phone buzzed almost instantly. My mother's name glowed on the screen like a warning flare. I didn't answer. She called again and again until finally a message appeared. "Your little stunt means nothing. You're still nothing. Don't embarrass yourself further." I stared at those words for a long time. If words could bruise, I'd be purple. But bruises fade. Paperwork doesn't. I placed my phone face down, took a long breath, and listened to the silence. It wasn't comforting, but it was mine. That night, I slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. When dawn came again, my phone was vibrating off the table, 35 missed calls, 10 frantic voicemails. My brother's voice, usually smooth and arrogant, cracked through the speaker. Averly, what the hell did you do? Mom's losing it. Dad's calling the bank. They froze the account. Fix it. Fix it now. For years I'd been their fixer, the quiet one who made messes disappear. But this time I let it ring. I got dressed, poured my coffee into a thermos, and stepped outside into the morning rush. Cars' horns, vendors shouting. Life moved on utterly indifferent. It was freeing. At the bank, the manager smiled nervously as he handed me the confirmation documents. Everything's in order, Ms. Carraway. The freeze is legally binding. I nodded, feeling the weight of law and ink settle into my hands like armor. By noon, my agent called, "You're in luck. We already have serious buyers. Given the location, it'll move fast." Fast. That word felt delicious. On the way home, I stopped by a cafe near the park. Families sat at outdoor tables, mothers brushing crumbs off their children's faces, siblings arguing playfully. It should have hurt to look at them, but all I felt was distance. That life had never been mine. Still, something inside me flickered, not sadness, power. I stirred my coffee until it went cold, then checked my phone again. Another message from my mother. "Return what you stole or don't bother showing your face at the wedding." I laughed softly, earning a few glances from nearby tables. I typed back just one line. "I won't be showing my face, but my absence will cost you." When I hit send, I caught my reflection in the cafe window, familiar, yet somehow foreign. My eyes looked the same, but there was something new in them, calm, control. Tomorrow would be the rehearsal dinner, and I already knew I wouldn't have to show up to ruin it. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, the city glowing beneath me like a restless sea. Somewhere downtown, they were probably toasting my brother's future and pretending I didn't exist. But I was already there, in the cracks of their plans, in the wires of their credit lines, in the quiet unraveling they didn't yet see coming. The hum of the city was like a lullaby. My pulse matched its rhythm, slow, certain. I wasn't gone. I was becoming. The next morning I woke early, almost eager. The sun painted the sky with a faint orange smear, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the day. I dressed simply: jeans, a white shirt, hair tied back like someone starting over, not someone at war. As I poured my coffee, my phone began to buzz again. I didn't even look. Let them call. Let them panic. Because by tonight, the cracks would show. And by tomorrow, their perfect world would crumble, one petal, one payment, one illusion at a time. The rehearsal dinner was set at the kind of place my family worshipped, a downtown hotel so polished you could see your own denial reflected in its marble floors. Crystal chandeliers, floral walls, and servers who smiled without ever meeting your eyes. Every surface gleamed with the pretense of perfection, and I could imagine my mother floating through it, flawless and frantic, her pride stitched tight under designer silk. I didn't go, of course. I didn't have to. My presence lingered in their absence of control. By late afternoon, the first call came. "The florist, Mrs. Carraway, the payment for your arrangements has been declined. We can't deliver without funds." Then the caterer. "The account we had on file isn't valid anymore. If payment isn't resolved by tonight, service will be canceled." Then the hotel manager. "Sir, your suite balance is overdue. We'll need immediate settlement to continue preparations." I could almost hear my mother's voice through the chaos, her tone clipped but desperate. There must be a mistake. But there wasn't. The mistake had been trusting me to always clean up after them. I sat 2 blocks away in a quiet bookstore cafe, the scent of old paper and cinnamon tea wrapping around me like a blanket. My phone buzzed relentlessly across the table, lighting up with every new disaster. Each vibration was another thread snapping in the tapestry of their control. I didn't feel joy exactly. It was something heavier. Justice, maybe. A strange calm filled me. The calm of someone finally watching truth do the work she never could. At 7, my cousin's text appeared. "Are you seeing this?" The rehearsal dinner's falling apart. No food, no flowers, people whispering everywhere. Then came a photo guest standing awkwardly in the lobby, servers wheeling trays of untouched dishes back into the kitchen. My mother's lipstick smeared as she argued with the manager. My father's face flushed with helpless rage. And my brother, my golden brother, standing frozen in the center of it all. The man of the hour with no stage left to stand on. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. My heart didn't race. It slowed. There was no glee, only release. The balance had shifted, the power had inverted. For the first time, their silence wasn't suffocating me, it was swallowing them. A new message blinked. This one from my brother. You're destroying everything. You think this makes you stronger? It just proves why no one wanted you here. For a second, I felt it, the old sting, the familiar ache of being unwanted. It almost worked. Almost. But I remembered the years I'd spent earning smiles that were never sincere. The holidays where my gifts went unopened. The nights I'd stayed awake balancing my father's books while they laughed in another room. So I set the phone down and let his words dissolve into static. Because I'd finally realized something: their cruelty wasn't my cage anymore. It was their inheritance. And tonight their inheritance was collapsing. Outside the cafe window, the city pulsed with life, couples rushing to dinner, taxis, honking neon signs blinking in rhythm with my heartbeat. I finished my tea and whispered, "That's enough for today." But deep down I knew it wasn't. Tomorrow was the wedding, the day they'd erase me for good. And tomorrow would be the day I became unforgettable. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of my apartment seemed to hum with memories, the sound of my mother's laughter, when I messed up my brother's mocking tone whenever I tried to speak, the emptiness of my father's approval, always just out of reach. I walked to the window and stared down at the streetlights below. Each glowing dot looked like a decision I could have made differently. But no, this path had always been leading here, to this reckoning. When dawn broke, I brewed my coffee and opened my phone. The screen was a battlefield of missed calls, messages, and voicemails. The storm had begun. The caterer had pulled out. The florist refused to deliver. The hotel locked its ballroom doors until payment cleared. And word had already spread: the Caraways don't pay their bills. Their perfect reputation, built on money and charm, was unraveling by the hour. I scrolled through the messages, slowly savoring every desperate tone. From my brother's fiancée, Averly, "Please just fix this. You don't understand how bad it's gotten. Everyone's talking." From my mother, "You're humiliating us. This is cruelty, not strength. You'll regret this." From my father, "We know it was you. Whatever satisfaction you're getting, it won't last. Families survive storms, outcasts don't." That one made me laugh, a real laugh, sharp and clean, echoing through my empty kitchen. For once, their storm wasn't mine to endure. It was theirs, entirely theirs. By noon, my cousin sent another photo. The bride stood outside the hotel, veil clutched in her fists, tears streaking her perfect makeup. My brother's jaw was tight enough to crack. My parents hovered nearby, pale and frantic, their composure dissolving under the weight of their own lies. I saved the photo. Not out of spite, but proof that I hadn't been the weak one, that I had only ever been the scapegoat in their story. Still, as the hours passed, a small voice whispered in my chest, "Is this enough?" Was it enough to see them crumble? Enough to let their empire of appearances burn? The thought lingered as the afternoon waned. The sun shifted across the walls, painting the room in soft gold, a deceptive warmth over a cold truth. Maybe revenge wasn't about destruction. Maybe it was about revelation, pulling down the curtain so everyone could see the rot underneath. By evening, I opened my laptop again. The screen glowed in the dim light, illuminating the apartment sale contract, waiting for my signature. My cursor hovered over the line. If I signed everything they thought was theirs, the safety net, the property, the inheritance would vanish. I took a deep breath, steady and deliberate, and pressed my fingertip against the trackpad. The click echoed through the room. Done. But even as I stared at the confirmation, I knew I wasn't finished. Revenge was never just about taking back what they owed. It was about truth. And I had all the proof I needed: years of financial records, unpaid debts, loans in my name, all buried under the illusion of a perfect family. They'd turned me into their shield, and now I would turn that shield into a mirror. I began gathering those documents, scanning every receipt, every transfer, every falsified payment. My heart didn't race, it steadied. This wasn't rage, it was justice dressed in precision. When the folder was complete, I attached it to an email and typed the subject line, "The truth you won't hear at the wedding." To every guest, every relative, every colleague my parents had ever bragged to. I hesitated once, only once, long enough to whisper, "This is the last time they'll ever use my silence as shelter." Then I hit send. The email whooshed away like a quiet detonation. Within minutes, replies began trickling in: confusion, pity, disbelief. And then the silence that follows: revelation, the kind that changes everything. I closed the laptop, exhaled, and stared out the window. The city lights shimmered like witnesses. Somewhere downtown, the wedding was collapsing under its own weight. And I, the daughter they'd told to disappear, had finally become the ghost haunting every corner of their name. By the time the sun began to set that day, The city had swallowed the sound of their downfall. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was a silence so sharp it hummed like the aftermath of an explosion. I sat on my balcony watching the lights flicker on in the neighboring buildings. Somewhere people were celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, quiet victories. And somewhere else my family, the Caraways, were being whispered about. The family that once measured worth by appearances had finally become gossip. I didn't need to check my phone to know. The proof was in the stillness, the absence of their usual noise. For years my life had revolved around their demands, their disapproval, their impossible expectations. And now, for the first time, I couldn't hear them. It felt unreal. Then around 8 p.m., the first message broke the silence. It was from my cousin again, short and breathless. They canceled the ceremony. Guests are leaving. Everyone knows. I didn't respond. I just stared at the text until the screen dimmed. I'd expected satisfaction, a rush, a release. But all I felt was something quieter, heavier, like standing at the edge of a battlefield surrounded by the wreckage of both armies. Was this what justice felt like? Or was it just the echo of pain returning home? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd felt loved by them. Maybe when I was 12, when my father handed me a math trophy and said, "That's my girl," before turning back to congratulate my brother for winning Best Smile in his school yearbook. After that, the love had rules, conditions. If I was useful, I was tolerated. If I disagreed, I was a problem. If I showed emotion, I was dramatic. For years, I'd convinced myself that being quiet was the only way to survive. Now silence had become my revenge. I turned off my phone and let the night air cool my skin. But somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. People like my parents didn't vanish quietly. They regrouped, rebranded, rebuilt their delusions. And when their empire crumbled, they always came knocking on the doors of the ones they'd cast aside. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. The knock came the next evening, 3 sharp raps that weren't polite, weren't patient. The kind of knock that said, "We're entitled to entry." For a long moment, I didn't move. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, filling the room with the smell of chamomile and metal. I let the sound drown them out. Then came the voice I'd known all my life. "Averly, open this door. We are still your family." Still your family? The words were almost funny. My lips twitched into something close to a smile, but it wasn't humor, it was disbelief. Another knock, louder. My brother this time, his tone sharp with frustration. "Enough with the games, you've made your point. Fix this now." Fix this. Always that. Even now, standing in the ashes of their own cruelty, they still thought I existed to fix things. I walked to the door, slowly barefoot, the tile cold under my feet. I stopped just short of the handle. For a second, I considered staying silent forever, letting them twist outside, shouting into the void they'd built. But something inside me wanted closure, not vengeance. So I turned the handle. The door opened with a soft click, and there they were. My mother, first, her perfect facade cracked beyond repair. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, lipstick smudged into the corners of her mouth. Her hair, once sculpted into magazine perfection, hung limp and frayed. My father stood behind her shoulders, slumped the tie around his neck, loosened like a noose he'd finally grown tired of tightening. And beside them, my brother, red-eyed jaw, clenched his wedding ring, glinting like mockery under the hallway light. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then my father stepped forward, his voice trembling. "You've taken everything. We're ruined. Do you understand? People are talking. We can't even—" His words collapsed before they could find an ending. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who'd once told me I was too emotional, too fragile, too inconvenient. Now he was the one shaking. Then maybe I said quietly, "You shouldn't have asked me to disappear." The silence that followed was almost holy. It filled the space between us like a fog, thick, heavy, suffocating. My mother's lower lip trembled. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, barely human. "We're your blood, Averly. You can't just— Blood doesn't excuse betrayal." I interrupted, my tone steady. "You didn't lose a daughter. You threw one away." Her eyes darted toward the floor, and for the first time in my life she looked small. My brother exhaled sharply, muttering, "You've gone insane." But even his fury sounded tired, hollow. I stood there barefoot in my doorway, the 3 of them framed like ghosts of a past I'd finally outgrown. "You wanted me gone," I said softly. "Well, congratulations. You got your wish. Now go." My father tried to speak again, but I raised a hand. Don't. You've said enough for a lifetime. And with that, I closed the door. Firm, final. The sound of the lock sliding into place was the quietest victory I'd ever heard. Inside, the kettle had stopped whistling. Only the hum of the city remained low and steady like a heartbeat. I leaned against the door, exhaling slowly, realizing something I hadn't before. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was clean, empty in a way that wasn't hollow but purified. For years, their absence had been my wound. Now it was my freedom. I made tea and carried it to the balcony. Below, the city stretched wide and glittering, unaware of the small wars fought in its shadows. The air smelled like rain and possibility. I thought of my mother's trembling voice, my father's broken pride, my brother's disbelief. For so long, I'd chased their validation like a starving child begging for crumbs. Now I realized something simple. I'd never been hungry for their love. I'd been starving for my own peace. I finally took the first sip of my tea. It was bitter, but it was real. The next morning, I woke to sunlight bleeding through the curtains. No noise, no messages, no guilt, just quiet. The kind that felt earned. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the folder of funds from the apartment sale. It wasn't revenge money anymore, it was seed money, a foundation for something new. I started drafting a plan, something small, something mine. Maybe a design studio, maybe consulting. It didn't matter yet. What mattered was that it would be built on honesty, not manipulation. Each keystroke felt like stitching a wound closed. By noon, I received another text, this time from an unknown number. They're saying the Caraways went bankrupt. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that family. I stared at it for a moment before replying simply, I know. And that was the truth. Later that day, I took a walk through the city. The sky was overcast, but the air felt lighter. I passed the hotel where the wedding had been meant to take place. The grand doors were locked now, the ballroom dark. Only a few wilted petals clung to the pavement outside a funeral for a fantasy. I stopped at the window and saw my reflection among the glass and dust. Not the discarded daughter, not the invisible one, just a woman whole scarred and standing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fading. I felt like I was finally seen by myself. The morning after I closed the door on them, the world felt still. Not silent in the way it used to be, that suffocating hush that came from being ignored or excluded, but still in a gentler way. Like the air had been cleared, and for once the silence didn't mean absence. It meant room to breathe. I made coffee the way I always did, 2 spoons of sugar, 1 of bitterness, and carried it to the balcony. Below me, the city pulsed with a rhythm that was finally separate from theirs. I'd always imagined freedom as something loud, a kind of triumphant explosion. But it wasn't. It was quiet, like a sigh after holding your breath for years. The funds from the apartment sale sat safely in my account, more than enough to start again. I didn't see it as spoils of revenge. It felt more like an inheritance I'd written for myself, carved out of the wreckage of their greed. For a long time, I sat there just watching people pass: an old man feeding pigeons, a girl running late with a croissant in her mouth, a couple arguing softly over coffee. Life messy and unfiltered. The kind I'd never been allowed to have. In my family, everything had been curated. Emotions polished, imperfections hidden, affection conditional. My mother had built her reputation on appearance, my father on authority, and my brother on charm. And me, I was supposed to be the glue. The quiet, obedient daughter who kept the cracks from showing. But when you spend your life holding others together, you start to come apart yourself. I think that's what they never understood, that my revenge hadn't started with anger. It started with grief. Grief for the person I could have been if they had ever looked at me and seen someone worth loving without an asterisk. For years, I'd internalized their rejection until it became my identity. Every slight, every dismissive laugh, every time they told me I was too serious, too emotional, too much, it had built a small prison inside me. And that night when they told me to disappear, something inside me didn't break. It opened. That opening became everything. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding, not in grand ways but small, deliberate ones. I took down the framed family photos that had followed me from childhood homes to apartments, replaced them with blank canvases, empty space for new memories I hadn't made yet. I deleted their contacts not in rage, but in peace. Their numbers didn't feel like ties anymore. They felt like weights I no longer needed to carry. I started going on morning walks. It sounds trivial, but after years of moving only under obligation from home to work, from family events to silence, walking without purpose felt revolutionary. The air smelled different. The city's noises didn't grate. They comforted. I was anonymous among strangers, and anonymity, I realized, was freedom's purest form. Some mornings I caught myself smiling for no reason. Other mornings I cried halfway down the street, not because I was sad, but because my body was still learning that it was allowed to feel again. One day at a cafe near the park, I met a woman named Eliza. She was sitting alone, sketching in a notebook with a concentration that reminded me of who I used to be before life turned into survival. I don't even remember how we started talking, something about the weather maybe. But by the time I finished my coffee, she'd told me about the small business she ran, designing stationery sets and digital art prints. "You look like someone who's rebuilding," she said, half smiling. The words startled me, not their accuracy, but the gentleness behind them. People in my family never spoke gently. They spoke with sharpness disguised as honesty. "I guess I am," I said. "You'll find your rhythm again," she replied, like it was a fact, not encouragement. "Just give it time." That night I thought about her words for hours. Rhythm. That was what had been missing. My life had been noise without melody, a constant hum of expectation, never harmony. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began mapping out something new. A small consultancy focused on helping independent artists and women entrepreneurs manage their finances. It wasn't about money. It was about purpose. Turning the very skills my family exploited into tools for people who'd never have used them against me. I didn't announce it, didn't post about it, didn't need validation. I just built quietly, slowly, carefully, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't building for them. Weeks turned into months. Word spread about my family, the perfect Caraways, whose empire had collapsed in public disgrace. There were rumors of lawsuits, unpaid vendors, social circles turning cold. I didn't have to check. People sent me screenshots, whispers, half apologies disguised as curiosity. But I didn't feed it. I didn't gloat. Revenge, I realized, isn't meant to be savored forever. If you hold on to it too tightly, it curdles into the very poison you escaped from. One evening, as I was organizing files for a new client, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something about the subject line made me pause. "From your mother." I hesitated before opening it. The message was short. "Averly, I don't know how to begin. I thought love was control. I thought silence was protection. I was wrong. Your father is sick. He doesn't say much these days. Your brother moved away. The house feels too big. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you found peace. Mom." I read it 3 times, each time slower. There was no apology, not really, just an echo of one, but it didn't sting, not anymore. For years I had fantasized about this moment, the day they'd beg, the day they'd see. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory, it felt like closure. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Some stories end not with forgiveness or fury, but with silence that's finally earned. That night I stood by my window again, looking out at the city lights. I realized that my revenge had never truly been about making them suffer. It was about making them see. And whether they understood or not didn't matter anymore. I saw myself clearly now. The woman they told to disappear had vanished, yes, but not into darkness, into light. In the reflection of the window, I saw a version of me I barely recognized, calm, centered, quietly radiant. I whispered to her, "We made it." She smiled back. And for the first time, I believed her. Months passed. Seasons changed. The cold air that once stung my lungs softened into spring warmth. Life moved quietly, and I let it. Some mornings I still woke with that old instinct, the ache to check my phone, to brace myself for messages that never came. But each time I reminded myself silence was not abandonment anymore. It was peace. I filled my days with small, deliberate acts of rebuilding. Morning walks, fresh flowers by the window, jazz humming through the apartment as I worked. My little consultancy began to grow, artists, small business owners, people who reminded me of the girl I used to be before my family taught me to shrink. Helping them succeed didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance restored. One afternoon, I found myself walking by the old hotel, the one where my brother's wedding had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The chandelier that once glowed like a monument to perfection was gone, replaced by simple warm lights that flickered softly in the lobby. The marble floors no longer gleamed like mirrors, they looked lived and human. I paused by the window, my reflection overlapping with the ghosts of that day. For the first time, I didn't see the girl who'd been cast out. I saw a woman who had survived. It's strange how grief transforms over time. In the beginning, it feels like drowning. Then slowly, it becomes the ocean you learn to swim in. Standing there, I realized I wasn't angry at them anymore. I wasn't even sad. What I felt was something new, something softer, compassion maybe. Not for them, but for the version of me who once begged them to see her. She had done everything right, studied hard, stayed quiet, played peacemaker, and still she'd been told she was unworthy. She'd believed it for too long. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her you were never the problem. You were the price they refused to pay for their own peace. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from unrest, but from clarity. I sat on my balcony with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the city lights flicker like stars too stubborn to fade. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, loving, betraying, forgiving. Life kept happening endlessly imperfect and endlessly alive. And I was part of it again. I thought about my father, the man whose silence had been his cruelty. I wondered if he ever replayed that night at the dinner table, if the words disappear forever haunted him the way they once haunted me. I thought about my mother with her fragile pride and her illusions of control. Maybe she was sitting in that too big house surrounded by expensive furniture and unpaid debts, realizing that her perfection had cost her everything real. And my brother somewhere out there trying to rebuild his own name, probably still blaming me for his fall. I didn't hate him for it. I just pitied him. Because while I had learned that peace could bloom even in ashes, he was still chasing applause in a theater that had burned down long ago. That was the moment I understood something simple but profound. Revenge had been the fire that cleared the field, but forgiveness, quiet, private, forgiveness was what allowed new life to grow. I didn't forgive to heal them. I forgave to stop them from owning a single piece of me anymore. The next morning, I packed a small box of things from my old life, a photo of me as a child, my mother's handwriting on an old birthday card, a few trinkets that once sat on my father's desk, and took them to the riverbank. The sun was rising low and golden. I sat on a bench and held the photo in my hands. In it, I was maybe 8 years old, standing beside my brother, smiling up at the camera like the world was still good. I traced my thumb across that girl's face. "You deserved better," I whispered, "but you found it anyway." Then I let the photo slip into the water. The current carried it away slowly, gently. Not destruction release. As it floated downstream, I realized something else I didn't need to win. I'd already won. Because freedom wasn't about leaving them behind. It was about no longer needing to look back. When I returned home, I opened my journal. Something I hadn't done since before the storm began. I wrote just one sentence. Peace is the quiet kind of revenge. It wasn't poetic or perfect, it was just true. Weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in a trembling hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Averly, I've sold the house. I'm leaving the city. Your father wanted to call you before he passed, but I told him not to. He wanted forgiveness. You deserved distance. Take care of yourself, Mom." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not to keep her memory alive, but to mark the end of something. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sorrow. Just a strange kind of peace, like closing a book whose ending you've already guessed but needed to finish anyway. And when I stepped out onto the balcony again, the city was alive beneath me, sirens, laughter music drifting through the air. I felt the breeze on my skin, and for the first time I felt whole. I thought of all the people who'd ever been told they were too much, too loud, too emotional, too inconvenient. All the daughters told to disappear. I wanted to tell them, don't vanish, transform, because that's what I had done. I hadn't disappeared. I'd rewritten the story. If you're watching this, maybe you've been where I was, silenced, discarded, underestimated. Maybe you've been told that your worth depends on how much you can endure. But let me tell you something, strength isn't silence. It's surviving the noise long enough to hear your own voice again. And revenge. Revenge doesn't have to be fire and fury. Sometimes it's just peace so loud they can't stand to hear it. So if you're listening to this right now, take it from me. One day the pain will stop being your story's headline. It will just be a footnote, and the rest, every chapter that follows, will belong to you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you that healing is its own victory, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me your story in the comments. I'll be here reading them quietly, rooting for every version of you that refuses to disappear. Because we don't vanish, we rise, and sometimes that's the sweetest revenge of all.